Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Caitanya Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachade Shatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchkalptarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha Paditanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Yes, so we are in the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which is titled Karma Yoga. And of course, obviously that is the subject. But as we explained, and we also gave examples, Srila Prabhupada, because his focus is not like technical sorts of understandings, but what is the message of Bhagavad Gita? And the message of Bhagavad Gita is that we must become Krishna's devotees, devotional service. And actually, an interesting point, let me just say a word or two about it, is that Karma Yoga has similarities to some degree with Bhakti Yoga. We should be aware of that Karma Yoga, the karma in Karma Yoga means your more or less natural duty in Varnashram according to your physical and psychological nature. And Arjuna, of course, he was a Kshatriya, and physically he was a Kshatriya. He had big, powerful body. And his mind was the mind of a Kshatriya. Someone else who's a Brahmin, they have different type of physique and really a different type of psychology. So that is all reflected in your karma, your natural duties. And then yoga, of course, means to link with God, to link with Krishna. So Karma Yoga then means to do your natural material duty for the, well, not exactly for the pleasure of the Lord, but at least offering the results to the Lord. Offering the results to the Lord with detachment. We've already read a number of verses about how you must be detached and even working in a detached way, getting the mercy of the Lord. So this is all part of Karma Yoga. Whereas Bhakti Yoga means that we are not, it's not really a question of what is my physical or psychological nature. At least ultimately it's not. In the earlier stages, it's possible it may be to some degree, yes, but it's generally not a big consideration. The main consideration is, what does Krishna want from you? What service does he want from you? And if Krishna wants you to do one thing, real bhakti means you'll do it. But if Krishna wants you to do another thing, real bhakti means you'll do it, if Krishna wants. And the question of whether it's your type of thing, or whether you're really comfortable doing it, or you're maybe not so comfortable, it's not really, that's not the point. Only when the devotee is sort of like more neophyte then these considerations are there. But as the devotees become more advanced, then it's really just what, I'll do anything, whatever Krishna wants, in a mood of devotion, appreciation, gratitude for the mercy that one's receiving from the Lord. So you can see there are differences there in terms of the sort of the basis upon which it is decided what you will do. Karma Yoga, the basis for the decision is what's your physical, psychological nature. In devotional service, the basis for the decision is what does Krishna want? What will please the Lord? So, and we gave an example. We read a verse. It may have been the first verse, actually. Anyway, we read a verse in which quite plainly in the Sanskrit Karma Yoga was there, but Prabhupada translated it as devotional service. This is Prabhupada's perspective, that Bhagavad Gita is to bring us to devotional service. And wherever you look in Bhagavad Gita, you should find some things about devotional service. Okay, so that's just, to recap slightly. But I want to read a few of the verses. We got up to verse 6. Let me read from verse 3, and then we'll carry on. I just read the translation of 6, and we didn't go into it. Actually, what I'll do, I will read the whole section from verse 3 to verse 9. That's what I'll do right now. And the title of the section is Fight, Do Your Duty Without Attachment. So, 3. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, O sinless Arjuna, I've already explained that there are two classes of men who try to realize the self. Some are inclined to understand it by empirical philosophical speculation, and others by devotional service. Yes, that's verse 3. And here I've got the Sanskrit here. And what Prabhupada has translated as devotional service, it's Karma Yoga. All right, so now verse 4. Not by merely abstaining from work can one achieve freedom from reaction, nor by renunciation alone can one attain perfection. That's 4. So he's indicating that working in a renounced, detached spirit is really the best thing. But it becomes more clear as we go on the next few verses. Verse 5, everyone is forced to act helplessly according to the qualities he's acquired from the modes of material nature. Therefore, no one can refrain from doing something, not even for a moment. You got to do something. Something. You can't just sit there and just literally do nothing. Certainly not for an extended period. Yeah. And, okay. So then on to verse 6. We're going to start off again from verse 6 once I've read these verses initially. One who restrains the senses of action, but whose mind dwells on sense objects, certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender. Yeah. So Krishna is really advocating action. 7. On the other hand, if a sincere person tries to control the active senses by the mind and begins karma yoga in Krishna consciousness without attachment, he is by far superior. There you go. Yes, advocating. Control yourself, but engage wholeheartedly in karma yoga devotional service without detachment. And verse 8, perform your prescribed duty, for doing so is better than not working. One cannot even maintain one's physical body without work. In other words, just forget about this simply analytical process, how to distinguish the soul from matter, at least as a process in and of itself, not going beyond those considerations. The thing is that in that sort of detached, renounced consciousness, you have to engage in karma yoga or devotional service. And finally, verse 9, work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed. Otherwise, work causes bondage in this material world. Therefore, O son of Kunti, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction, and in that way you'll always remain free from bondage. Okay, so that's that section. And that last verse, anyway, we'll discuss it in a few minutes, but he's really emphasizing yajna, sacrifice. And yajna is another name of Lord Vishnu. So work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed. Okay, so we got up, we touched on verse 6, we just read the translation. Let's go back to verse 6 and we'll carry on from there and see how far we get. So one who restrains the senses of action, but whose mind dwells on sense objects, certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada, of course, this is, something that Srila Prabhupada would definitely get into, that there are many people who make a show of meditation or yoga, particularly meditation, but just some yoga practice also. But actually, in their minds, their real interest is in some form of sense gratification. You may have read in the Prabhupada Leelamrita how when Srila Prabhupada first arrived in America, he was visiting different yoga studios and just places he thought people might be interested. And there were some Indian yogi type people who were running those places, like Dr. Mishra was one, and there were others. Was it Dr. Mishra? I think it was Dr. Mishra who was telling Prabhupada that you can't get these people to stop eating meat and, just loose association with the opposite sex. And even if you yourself, just in your own life, are too strict, what to speak of being strict with them, then, people will not get involved. They won't take part. So he said to Srila Prabhupada, actually what you need to do, you have to be a yogi by day and a bogi by night. Bogi meaning a sense enjoyer. In other words, get into some of these things in one way or another. Otherwise, you won't be successful. Yeah. So Prabhupada really didn't appreciate that at all. And Prabhupada carried on with Krishna consciousness as it is, of course. Yeah. So these types of people, like Prabhupada elsewhere, we read a little while ago, Srila Prabhupada talked about some people, they take sannyas. They take sannyas. Not Krishna conscious sannyas, but some impersonal or whatever form of sannyas. But then after some time, they find that the senses and the mind, they're very persistent. They're very persistent. Even after many years, they're still very persistent. And they find they can't really manage, at least comfortably, to maintain those standards. So therefore what they do, they get involved in some sort of quasi-spiritual activity. It's not even quasi-spiritual, but really generally some philanthropic activity, means material activity. But then they promote it as being spiritual. And the problem with that is that the innocent public, they don't know one from the other. And therefore they accept, oh yes, that, some charitable activity, opening a hospital, not with a spiritual theme, like our devotees in Mumbai. Some devotees have a hospital, but there's so much preaching going on. And they're making a living, their householders making a living through doing their natural activity. But to build a hospital, build an ordinary school, build a hospital simply for curing people, nothing beyond that, or a school just with ordinary material education. But then they try to promote it as being spiritual, service to man as service to God, that sort of idea, which is not true. Service to man is service to man, and service to God is service to God. The two are different. So yeah, they're making a show of being dressed in the, attractive, apparently spiritual ways, but they're involved in compromised activity because they cannot maintain the standards of renunciation. Yeah. Right, and this is who Krishna is talking about here. So Srila Prabhupada makes the point, let's see, the basic idea is that better to find your natural position in Van Ashram. Yeah, in the middle of the purport. For sense enjoyment, one can act in any capacity of the social order. But if one follows the rules and regulations of his particular status, he can make gradual progress in purifying his existence. Better to be, Prabhupada said, better to be an honest street sweeper than a charlatan meditator, a cheating meditator. Yeah. Okay. So let's carry on to verse 7. On the other hand, if a sincere person tries to control the active senses by the mind and begins karma yoga in Krishna consciousness without attachment, is by far superior. Yes, and again, well, Krishna uses the term karma yoga, and Prabhupada translates it as such. So Prabhupada's contrasting in the purport. He's contrasting a cheating process, artificial renunciation, but getting into some compromised activities with some excuse that it's spiritual, as opposed to some honest attempt like this. Sincere person trying to control the senses and the mind and engage in karma yoga or devotional service. This is basically the idea. So Prabhupada begins the purport. Instead of becoming a pseudo-transcendentalist for the sake of wanton living and sense enjoyment, it's far better to remain in one's own business and execute the purpose of life, which is to get free from material bondage and enter into the kingdom of God. So therefore this verse is advocating karma yoga, varnashram, but really without attachment. In just karma kandya, it's assumed attachment will be there. But here Krishna is saying without attachment. Yes. So much better, Srila Prabhupada says, than, let's see, where's this? Yeah. Better than being a false, right at the end of the purport, better than being a false pretender who adopts show bottle spiritualism to cheat the innocent public, a sincere sweeper in the street is far better than the charlatan meditator who meditates only for the sake of making a living. This is a famous statement of Prabhupada's. Charlatan just basically means cheater. So on to verse 8, perform your prescribed duty, for doing so is better than not working. One cannot even maintain one's physical body without work. So that's a pretty simple, straightforward point. How much money are you going to make by just sitting with your eyes closed, trying to meditate on nothing or something or anything? Or just getting into some analytical process. How are you going to maintain yourself? What to speak of make spiritual advancement? You won't even be able to maintain body and soul together. So therefore, better to just honestly engage in your prescribed duty. And that way, in varnashram, then whether you're Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, doesn't matter, you'll be able to maintain yourself. So, again, Prabhupada talks about the pretenders. There are many, at the beginning of the purport, there are many pseudo-meditators who misrepresent themselves as belonging to high parentage, and great professional men who falsely pose that they've sacrificed everything for the sake of advancement in spiritual life. Because we mustn't forget, Arjuna, in one way or another, was suggesting that he would do something like that. He would just renounce everything, perhaps go to the Himalayas or some sort of isolated place, try and meditate. That had been Arjuna's suggestion, directly or indirectly. But because his material nature is of a certain type, Kshatriya, sooner or later he would be forced to perform his prescribed duty. Yeah, he wouldn't be able to maintain that renounced position. Yes. So to do that, one has to engage in varnashram, perform one's prescribed duties, and try and cultivate detachment and cultivate attachment to Krishna. And then the last verse in this section, verse 9, work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed. Otherwise, work causes bondage in this material world. Therefore, O son of Kunti, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction, and in that way you'll always remain free from bondage. So, of course, Prabhupada mentions, it's already been mentioned right at the beginning of the purport here. Prabhupada mentions, since one has to work even for the simple maintenance of the body, the prescribed duties for a particular social position and quality are so made that that purpose can be fulfilled. Yes. However, as the verse says, it has to be done, this work has to be done as a sacrifice for Vishnu. Yajna is one name of Vishnu. Yeah. Yajna artha, sacrifice, work done for yajna, for Vishnu. It has to be done in that renounced spirit. Otherwise, you'll just be attached to material life and you won't really get anywhere. Prabhupada makes an important point, which we've also mentioned at the beginning of the second paragraph. One has to work for the satisfaction of Vishnu. Any other work done in this material world will be a cause of bondage, for both good and evil work have their reactions, and any reaction binds the performer. Yeah. You know, there are stories like King Nrig. King Nrig, he was a very pious king. He would always give cows in charity to Brahmins. The one cow that he'd given away the day before somehow came back, and he didn't know that. So the next day, King Nrig gave the same cow again to someone else. And that first person came and said, hey, where's my cow? There's my cow. You gave my cow to someone else. And Nrig said, look, no problem. I'll give you 10 cows for that one cow. Take 10 cows, good cows. But the man said, no, I want that cow. That's my cow. But the other person also said, no, it's my cow. And it was an unsolvable problem. And in his next life, he had to take birth as a lizard. Yeah. So any work, he's trying to do many good things. But any work done in this material world causes bondage, one way or the other. Yes. So Prabhupada makes the point here that nothing, this is now the end of the purport, nothing should be performed for sense gratification, but everything should be done for the satisfaction of Krishna. This practice will not only save one from the reaction of work, but also gradually elevate one to transcendental loving service of the Lord, which alone can raise one to the kingdom of God. Very good. So now we go on to the next section. Third section is from verse 10 to verse 16. And we call it, or the subject matter basically is, from Karma Kandya to Karma Yoga. And the sense of it is, we'll read all the verses right now, but the sense, just so you know what to look for, the sense is that yes, sacrifice, yajna, sacrifice must be done, means work must be done in a detached spirit like that. But first of all, Lord Krishna speaks a few verses in which he talks about doing these sacrifices for the demigods. When they're done for the demigods, it is not karma yoga, it is karma kandya. It is karma kandya. For it to be karma yoga, or any type of yoga, it has to be done for the Supreme Lord. Yes, otherwise, sacrifices done for the demigods, they are necessarily karma kandya. Okay, so let's read through. First of all, there's a fairly famous verse which actually talks about sacrifice for Vishnu. But then we get into a couple of verses after that, and they're very clearly talking about sacrifices for demigods. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Shri Giri Govardhan Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. All right, so here we go. We're going to read from verse 10 to verse 16, straight through. In the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and demigods, along with sacrifices for Vishnu, and blessed them by saying, "Be thou happy by this yajna, sacrifice, because its performance will bestow upon you everything desirable for living happily and achieving liberation." In other words, the underlying program for people who are progressive, who want to really live properly, even in this world, is to be engaged in sacrifice and not just take things from the material world. So let's read on. Like we said, now the subject of demigod worship comes up. So verse 11, the demigods, being pleased by sacrifices, will also please you, and thus by cooperation between men and demigods, prosperity will remain for all, will reign for all. Yes, so the demigods, very clearly. In charge of the various, this is 12, in charge of the various necessities of life, the demigods, being satisfied by the performance of yajna, sacrifice, will supply all necessities to you. But he who enjoys such gifts without offering them to the demigods in return is certainly a thief. So from now, the subject changes to more Krishna consciousness. Particularly the next verse is very important verse, actually. 13. The devotees of the Lord are released from all kinds of sins because they eat food which is offered first for sacrifice. Others who prepare food for personal sense enjoyment verily eat only sin. I mean, this is a verse establishing that just being vegetarian is not sufficient. You must offer your food, you must take prasadam. 14. All living bodies can subsist on food grains, which are produced from rains. Rains are produced by performance of yajna, sacrifice, And yajna is born of prescribed duties. Interesting. Prescribed duties. 15. Regulated activities are prescribed in the Vedas, and the Vedas are directly manifested from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So consequently, the all-pervading transcendence is eternally situated in acts of sacrifice. So there you go. Sacrifice to the transcendental Supreme Personality of Godhead. And 16, it's the last verse in this section. My dear Arjuna, one who does not follow in human life the cycle of sacrifice, thus established by the Vedas, certainly leads a life full of sin. Living only for the satisfaction of the senses, such a person lives in vain. So, okay, let's now go through this section. Verse 10 again. In the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and demigods, along with sacrifices for Vishnu, and blessed them by saying, be thou happy by this yajna, sacrifice, because its performance will bestow upon you everything desirable for living happily and achieving liberation. So like this, we see the intention of the Lord in manifesting the material world. He doesn't want to just give us a place to try to enjoy, and he doesn't want us just to suffer. But he has arranged everything so if we engage in sacrifice, in yajna, we will be able to improve ourselves, and not just improve ourselves, we'll be able to perfect ourselves and go back to Godhead. This is the purpose. I mean, this is a really important point. This is the purpose of the material world. Just like I remember once, well, actually, I remember when Srila Prabhupada was giving his Vyasa Puja class, 1973, in Bhaktivedanta Manor, he talked about this point. Basically, yeah. Well, he was saying that when something sophisticated is made, then the creator provides an instruction manual, how to use it. And then Prabhupada talked about the microphone he was speaking into. If you don't know what is a microphone and you don't have an instruction manual, what on earth are you going to think it is? Maybe you'll think it's a weapon, like our one here. If someone hits you on the head with this, I tell you what, you'd be in serious trouble. So someone might think that a microphone is a weapon, like a little truncheon, a little club, unless they get the information. So without that information, people think the material world is a place for enjoyment, or some think it's a place for suffering, but it's a place for sacrifice, through which you'll live happily and then be liberated. And 11, the demigods, being pleased by sacrifices, will also please you. And thus, by cooperation between men and demigods, prosperity will reign for all. So, yeah, the sacrifice is good for the demigods. They get what they need. But ultimately, sacrifice, yeah, anyway, here in the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains how that the demigod worshippers do their different yagyas and things, and they get what they need. So that's fine. But Prabhupada makes the point, it's in the middle of the first paragraph, that even doing their sacrifices for demigods, even in so doing, Lord Vishnu is worshipped in all yagyas as the chief beneficiary. Yes. So in this way, this should be recognized by people, although generally it's certainly not recognized, but it's meant to be. And therefore Prabhupada brings in Krishna consciousness. They should do these yagyas for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yes. At the end of the purport, by performance of yajna, one's eatables become sanctified. And by eating sanctified foodstuffs, one's very existence becomes purified. By the purification of existence, finer tissues in the memory become sanctified. And when memory is sanctified, one can think of the path of liberation. And all these combined together lead to Krishna consciousness, the great necessity of present-day society. Prabhupada explains in a class on this verse, listen to this. By the grace of Lord Krishna, Arjuna pleased all the demigods, whereas the worshippers of the demigods may achieve only partial benefits, which are also perishable like the demigods themselves. One who is favored by the demigods may not be favored by Krishna. Arjuna pleased the demigods, so they gave him all their celestial weapons. Yes, anyway. So, yeah, and then verse 12 is again focusing on the demigods. In charge of the various necessities of life, the demigods, being satisfied by the performance of yajna, will supply all necessities to you. But he who enjoys such gifts without offering them to the demigods in return is certainly a thief. And Srila Prabhupada goes to some length in the purport to, again, basically revisit the subject of worshipping the demigods. Okay, but actually it would be better to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yeah. So, in the second paragraph, Prabhupada makes the point how the demigods are supplying food, eatables, even meat. They're supplying heat, light, water, air, without, like this. These things are being supplied by the demigod agents of the Lord, or ultimately by the Lord. Chemicals are being supplied by the Lord. And if we try to just take those things without reciprocating, then at the bottom of the paragraph, Prabhupada makes the point that if we simply take supplies from the agents of the Lord for sense gratification and become more and more entangled in material existence, which is not the purpose of creation, certainly we become thieves, and therefore we're punished by the laws of material nature. A society of thieves can never be happy because they have no aim in life. So what we must do, though, right at the end of the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, this is all very well, sacrifice to the demigods, but actually what we should do, we should engage in the Sankirtan Yajna. That's the Yajna for this age. Then verse 13, like we said, it's kind of famous verse about eating. The devotees of the Lord are released from all kinds of sins because they eat food which is offered first for sacrifice. Others who prepare food for personal sense enjoyment verily eat only sin. We've mentioned before, you may be aware, you may have even heard or read, when Prabhupada did a program in the Durban City Hall, one gentleman who was an enthusiastic vegetarian, he wanted Prabhupada to say something for promoting vegetarianism so people would become vegetarian. Whereas our program is to offer whatever Krishna wants, which happens to be vegetarian food, to offer those things to him. So he asked Prabhupada something to the effect, can you say something about vegetarianism? And Srila Prabhupada answered, it is not very important. Whether you eat meat or whether you're vegetarian, it doesn't really matter. The main thing is you must offer your food to the Lord, which effectively means you have to be vegetarian. Have to be vegetarian, because Krishna will only accept lacto-vegetarian food. Yes, so the devotees, Prabhupada discusses in the, Haribol, in the middle of the purport, that the devotees cannot accept anything without first offering it to the Lord. Therefore, such devotees always perform yagyas in different modes of devotional service, such as Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam, Archanam, etc. These are all types of sacrifices for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. All right, so number 14. All living bodies subsist on food grains which are produced from rains. Rains are produced by performance of yajna, sacrifice, and yajna is born of prescribed duty. Yes, so as explained here, there is you could say a procedure, and the procedure is as follows. Let's see. You do your prescribed duties, which involve yajnas. Then rains come, and then grains come. And then you eat the grains, well, you offer them, and you eat them, and then you live. Prescribed duties, which involve yajnas, produce rains, which produce grains. That is what is being described here. Yes. And again, at the end of the purport, Srila Prabhupada presents the idea of doing Sankirtan Yajna. Here's a little excerpt from a lecture on these verses by Prabhupada. Devotee, Russia is importing its food grains now. Prabhupada, so why can they not produce sufficient, such a big country? Devotee, and Eastern Europe, which is also communist, gets all its supplies from Prabhupada. No. What is their explanation? Russia is the biggest country. Land. Harisori. The reason was there was no rain. Prabhupada. Then you have to depend on rain. And when we say Parjanyad anasambhava. And yagyad bhavati parjanya. That means, rascal, you take one side, ardha kukuti nyaya, cut the chicken in half and take away the mouth. It is expensive, it has to be fed. And keep the rear side where the eggs come from. You'll get eggs. So this is ardha kukuti nyaya. Ardha meaning half, kukuti meaning chicken, and nyaya meaning logic. The logic of the half hen. Remove the expensive part that you have to feed and just keep the part which produces the eggs which you can use. The rascal doesn't know that if you separate the mouth, there will be no egg. And verse 15, regulated activities are prescribed in the Vedas, and the Vedas are directly manifested from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, the all-pervading transcendence is eternally situated in acts of sacrifice. So Prabhupada makes an interesting point here in the beginning of the purport. Yagyarta karma, or the necessity of work for the satisfaction of Krishna only, is more expressly stated in this verse. If we have to work for the satisfaction of the Yajna Purusha, Vishnu, then we must find out the direction of work in Brahman, or the transcendental Vedas. Yes. You have to approach the Vedas, and particularly the transcendental parts of the Vedas, in order to really fulfill this idea of which, in the verse which was describing the purpose of the whole material world, yagyartat karmanon yatra. Yeah. So, otherwise, if you don't do that, if you don't follow the direction of the Vedas, Prabhupada explains in the purport here, you're doing vikarma. Vikarma, which means sinful activity, unauthorized or sinful activity. So Prabhupada makes the point. It's just a few sentences down from the beginning of the purport. As one has to work in ordinary life by the direction of the state, one similarly has to work under direction of the supreme state of the Lord. Yes. Yes. So all these directions, the Vedic directions, Prabhupada quotes a verse here from somewhere, Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, how the Vedas came from the breathing of the Lord. So therefore, the Vedas describe the performance of sacrifice. That is directly coming from the breathing of the Lord. In those scriptures, the four Vedas, Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Samaveda, and Atharva Veda, they're all emanations from the breathing of the great personality of Godhead. And they talk about doing sacrifice. So, therefore, consequently, the all-pervading transcendence, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, can be found in and through and in activities of sacrifice. And verse 16, my dear Arjuna, one who doesn't follow in human life the cycle of sacrifice, thus established by the Vedas, certainly leads a life full of sin, living only for the satisfaction of the senses. Such a person lives in vain. Sort of summing up, a warning, summing up, or what has been described in the other verses we just read through. If you just live for sense gratification, Prabhupada says, it's a very risky life of being condemned more and more. But Prabhupada concludes the purport, but if by performing yajnas one doesn't become Krishna conscious, such principles are counted as only moral codes. One should not therefore limit his progress only to the point of moral codes, but should transcend them to attain Krishna consciousness. All right, so we'll go on tomorrow. So we came from Karma Kandya to Karma Yoga. Karma Kandya, worshipping the demigods. Karma Yoga, doing sacrifices from the transcendental parts of the Vedas, connecting us with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and we then become transcendental. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.